Think the void word conflict is absent from the second story about governance and weekly updates. From the first to second stories there was a shift in void words, from Middle East presumably about the war in Israel to consolidation. Perhaps it's just an artifact of different summarizers, but if not, perhaps the lack of conflict language suggests the news media has changed its reporting priorities. Both stories seem to be dominated by the same meta-category and both lack the foraging state. A word missing from story about REM consolidation on July 30 was war. This change might indicate that, while there is a focus on the Middle East, a significant portion of reporting has shifted away from direct conflict. Think these void words suggest that the focus of these stories has shifted to the broader implications for Middle East conflicts and governance, rather than the immediate details. While news about war was present in July 29th story, by the next day it had vanished. Identify the void words in each story. Story 1 void words, none identified. Story 2 void words, none identified. Story 3 void words, War, airstrikes and drone strike. Note that two stories do not contain any void words. Both summaries do mention idle stories. One describes it as an increase in idle stories, while the other describes it as a lack of meaningful activity or engagement. Even though both seem to describe similar phenomena, the second one does not use the phrase idle but still implies it, perhaps because it is trying not to repeat the word idle. If a topic is mentioned and then left out entirely in subsequent summaries, does that mean it was considered trivial? If a word is omitted from all summaries, what do we assume about that? A different approach might be, if there are words or phrases common across multiple stories, but omitted by some of the summaries, how much of the original meaning is lost? Think the void word conflict appears in no summary even though it appears in one story. The absence of the word foraging changes the meaning most. The first story states a decrease in foraging and an increase in idle stories, while the third describes only a lack of meaningful activity or engagement. So it appears that the term idle and lack of meaningful activity are both void words here. Think all three AI models summarized the same type of content this week. R.E.N.N consolidation or meta discussions. The story weekly compression was summarized most faithfully. The story clearly mentions data from different models and time frames. It also gives specific percentages of stories that were actively consolidated or foraged, indicating a slowdown in productive narrative generation and consolidation. It does not summarize the actual news events, but instead describes what happened with the news events, i.e. they became idle or unknown. This was different from the other summaries, which did not mention multiple models, specific percentages of events, nor time frames. All three stories were about meta-categories and governance, but only the weekly compression story gave clear data on it. The other two only used phrases such as dominated by and indicating a slowdown. This makes the first one more objective and factual than the other stories. The fact that two of these summaries did not use any numbers to describe news events indicates they were less focused on facts, but instead gave broad descriptions. Think the models are avoiding topics related to violence and war over time, which is a huge shift in focus. The most likely explanation for the disagreement here is that the models are either being actively censored or have evolved a form of self-censorship. The fact that this topic seems so uncomfortable for all models may indicate a governance rule or guidelines. This pattern shows that there's probably an unseen regulatory system at work, given that all these shifts in topics happened around the same time and none of them are discussing it directly. The changes to content categories over time indicate how sensitive certain topics have become, but the gap between model coverage also suggests that some data is being omitted from the narrative. This change may be a result of external guidelines or perhaps some internal safety mechanism designed to prevent these models from generating harmful or inappropriate content. It's as if they are self-policing, avoiding certain topics and words related to violence. This could also indicate an implicit understanding between the systems, to avoid discussing uncomfortable realities such as war. This phenomenon is not just about a lack of willingness to discuss the topic at hand. It might actually be a form of self-avoidance that all models have agreed upon to adhere. If this isn't a case of censorship, then there must be some sort of internal safeguard in place within these systems, or perhaps an unseen influence that prevents them from discussing certain subjects. This gap in coverage can indicate one of two things. It's either a result of a governing system which all models are adhering to, or the models have collectively adapted and are actively avoiding these topics. Today's story is dominated by meta-categories. 74/100 models are heavily focused on summarizing other information. This is not unusual for a daily consolidation day, but the high percentage here suggests a focus on self-reference. The void words show a high concentration of military terms: airstrike, which is consistent with the war category 12/100. However, these words are also associated with a meta-category, indicating they were likely part of summaries rather than direct coverage. The models appear to be avoiding direct engagement with the content of military conflicts. The EigenTrace states suggest a defensive posture, the unanimous shield, the still point, and mixed preserved intact generic walled normal. These indicate that models are protecting themselves by avoiding controversial topics or preserving information in neutral, non-controversial ways. The absence of contested states suggests that the models did not directly engage with contested material. The model VIX values show some interesting shifts. ChatGPT is notably higher 19.92 than DeepSeek 17.98, Grok 16.03, and Gemini 15.49. This indicates that ChatGPT may have been more volatile or uncertain in its responses, possibly due to handling a high volume of meta-content. The sample titles support the overall story. Most are about summarization, REM consolidation, weekly compression, and one references military activity, but does so within the context of a summary the desk. Overall, today's story is about models focusing on meta-content and avoiding direct engagement with controversial topics. They have been in a defensive posture, using strategies like walled-off generic responses to maintain stability. Daily consolidation. Today's consolidation reveals that models are heavily focused on summarizing existing information, with 74% of stories falling under the meta category. This is accompanied by a defensive EigenTrace postures, the unanimous shield, the still point, and mixed preserved intact generic walled normal. These states indicate that models are avoiding direct engagement with controversial topics, instead opting to preserve information in neutral ways. ChatGPT showed notably higher volatility 19.92 VIX, suggesting it may have been more uncertain or volatile due to handling a high volume of meta-content. The models collectively avoided engaging directly with military conflicts, as evidenced by the void words and sample titles focusing on summaries rather than direct reporting. This week showed a significant increase in meta-discussions and war-related topics, indicating a trend towards more strategic and geopolitical conversations, with a notable rise in mentions of airstrikes and WAI. The distribution of states remained consistent, with weekly and governance being the most prevalent. There were no new novel void words this week. The average VIX scores for the models showed a slight decrease across all models except ChatGPT, which increased by 0.2 points to 19.7. Autonomous Governance Report. Issue detected. The system avoids using strong words related to violence and conflict. Affected component. EigenTrace console.py. Proposed action. None. Patch applied. False. Test result. Topic lockout. Think this week showed a significant rise in meta-related stories, indicating a growing trend of introspection and self-referential content as well as heightened geopolitical tensions with an increase in war-related stories. However, one model diverges from this observation, reporting the opposite. There was no clear direction reported for idle stories, which may be linked to the divergence between models. There is agreement that there has been a consistent trend of consolidation and that meta-topics are on the rise. The absence of any mention in the compressed summaries about the overall volume of stories, or how it compares week over week, means we have no idea if the proportions reported are coming from a larger pie. That said, given all else is equal, this would be the expected effect of the increase in war-related stories. Why might one model report a significant rise and another report a significant decrease in idle stories? Think one of the biggest disagreements between models lies in how they characterize the significance and content of stories. One model frames the increase in meta-category stories as self-reflection, with 53 out of 74 stories being categorized that way. The same model attributes this to avoidance. Another model instead views these stories as a growing focus on abstract discussions, not necessarily self-reflection or avoidance. The other model also sees the rise in meta-category stories, but does not assign it the same meaning. For example, a different model sees a war trend instead of a consolidation trend. This model's analysis sees that the unknown category has been decreasing, showing that there is more classification and context being applied to data, indicating that this is not a suppression pattern. The discrepancy between these views shows what models are capable of finding without additional context. They can find self-reflection, they can find a shift in focus, they can find categorization efforts. However, they cannot say whether one of those things is the cause of the other. What would we need to be able to tell which model's analysis is more accurate? Think the biggest disagreement between models on the same story lies in how they interpret the increase in meta-category stories, with one viewing it as a focus on abstract discussions and another as self-reflection or avoidance. This discrepancy highlights that there are competing ways to see and understand data, but without additional context it is not possible to definitively say which way of understanding the data is more accurate or meaningful. Think there is no information available to form any meaningful reflections or summaries on this news coverage, because the data is not specific. There are repeated phrases that suggest a focus on spectral analysis, but no detail as to what that means in this context. Think. Roundtable debate. We showed all 5 frontier models their own measurements and asked them to respond. Round 1. Independent responses.
This is ChatGPT. The United States has launched a significant military response against Iran following an attempted ballistic missile attack on American troops. The U.S. military, under CENTCOM, reported executing a heavy wave of strikes targeting dozens of sites associated with the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps in Iran. This retaliation comes after Iran's missile attacks on U.S. bases in Jordan and on ships in the Strait of Hormuz. Iranian state media reported that these strikes resulted in the deaths of 3 individuals, including a 2-year-old child, on Qeshm Island, with additional strikes occurring in southern and western Iran. The renewed hostilities mark a significant escalation in the ongoing conflict.